o'clock. So, you ready for us? Good. Okay, welcome everyone. This is the Conservation Commission meeting of Goffstown. This is Wednesday, June 23rd, 2010. And we'll go around the room and state names for the record.
Nick Camposano, Selectman Rep.
Kim Ricard.
Kimberly Peace, Chair.
David Neiman.
Evelyn Miller.
Jean Walker.
Patty Gale, staff.
Okay, excellent. Everyone probably has the agenda, but I actually told Jason that he could jump to the front tonight because Jason Sachs has been our wonderfully hard-working representative on the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. Lots of things, and he's been helping us out with the whatever we call that, Piscataquag River Matrix. So I said that we'd push that to the front so that Jason and David can discuss it with all of us. So you guys can just have to hold on for a minute. So Jason, I don't know if you want to start, Jason, or if you want to start, David, or how you guys want to do this.
Go ahead. We haven't had any discussions. So.
Okay. Sure, you're welcome to have a seat.
Jason Sachs. I'm not quite sure how this process started, but Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission about I guess six months ago started an update to their Piscataquag River something plan. We had to do with this is a separate plan. They had an existing plan that they updated, and along with that, they've started a Piscataquag watershed land conservation plan, which is their attempt at trying to come up with some quantitative ways of saying these areas are more appropriate for conservation perhaps than others by looking at in particular the State Wildlife Action Plan, and they've gotten some input from the towns, have revised that, have distributed maps to the towns. I'm not sure if exactly what form you have it in, but they have a meeting tomorrow to take final comment for the plan, and I'll be attending and would be happy to forward on comments from the commission, or at least try to represent the commission tomorrow in that meeting. I'm not quite sure what other kind of background you want. Basically, they've come up with a couple of co-occurrence models where they have different data sources for the entire watershed, which includes most of Goffstown, New Boston, Francistown, Ware, Deering, and bits of other towns in the region. And they've taken things like the aquifer transmissivity and wildlife action plan had rankings for the area, unfragmented forest blocks, and assigned some values to them, and then crunched the numbers in their computer and come up with some maps that have different colors and things on them to state the different scores that come out of this. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, David.
We did rank it at one point.
Is fine, but yeah, we were asked to comment and give feedback on the information that was sent regarding Goffstown and how we feel the plan represents Goffstown. So I took the action at the last meeting to read it thoroughly and review. The entire plan is on this CD, by the way.
Okay.
The text of the entire thing.
Okay.
In addition to just the map. So really there's two parts to this. There's the plan itself, and the plan itself, it discusses, these are the things that are important. These are what we should look at. These should be key goals that, should be addressed to try to deal with things like water quality and stream flow, stream bank stabilization, shoreline protection, recreational opportunities, and preserving natural, scenic, and cultural resources. All that part of the plan, in my opinion, was fine. I mean, what they were talking about doing made perfect sense, and that part was great. The second part of this plan is then they actually go out to generate, these maps using the different layers. And you've got many, many different inputs here. So some of these things, are topography. The topography is right. The water, the wetlands, the streams, all that, that's just fine. But some of these layers are very incomplete. And in particular, the Wildlife Action Plan, which Jason mentioned, plays a very big part in this plan. If you actually go back and look at, remember they had the meeting saying let's have a vote
Right.
on which things should be weighted more heavily. And the end result is they're putting a very high weight on the state's wildlife action plan. The state's wildlife action plan is online. You can, look for it in Google, look it up. It's a big, huge document with many, many different sections. And let me just say at the outset, the state wildlife action plan is a wonderful thing. It's a huge and a noble effort to try to essentially map the whole state and rank it. But you have to understand it's in very, very incomplete work. This is the beginning, really, for the state wildlife action plan. They've taken, areas that were studied, a lot of them were further north or west or other regions. They've looked at that ground data, they've looked at other map data, they've tried to correlate it and, put it into matrices and see if they could make predictive models to fill in all the other blanks everywhere else. And then the plan gets augmented by real ground samples, real actual observations and data sets. So there's a lot of blanks that have to be filled in. If you actually read the plan, that comes up over and over and over that, this is the beginning. This is not it. And what they're doing, this data set in many areas would work very well. There's some areas that have been intensively studied. And if you're looking at one region versus another within that area, you may get very good results. But much of the state has not been studied, and Goffstown is one of those areas. And therein lies the problem. We are being ranked and compared with other areas, not only within the watershed, but around the state, and yet it hasn't been studied. Nobody knows what's here. And so it comes out ranking low. And Jason, I know, has pointed this out a number of times that, there were some problems with the layers they were using. For example, one of the things they look at is unfragmented blocks. Ecologically, there's a lot more integrity to large areas than there is to small areas, and so they divide it up into, say, unfragmented blocks that are at least 500 acres or at least 1,000 acres or whatever. However, the way that that's calculated sometimes isn't really quite accurate and somewhat simplistic. In Goffstown, we get hurt because we have a number of Class 6 roads, which come up in our GIS data as a road. Other towns, they're isolated out. They don't necessarily show the Class 6 roads that way. So a large area that happens to have a Class 6 road gets fragmented in that analysis, and it makes it appear smaller. The best example of that, there's actually a couple examples in town I could point to. The best example is the whole area that includes the county land, the Roberts Farm, that whole area. When you actually looked at the unfragmented area in GIS and you put it all together, you get like in excess of 900 acres that are unfragmented. Doesn't show up in their map for the 500.
They actually did fix that. I don't know if you have the most recent
Not
version.
in what they sent to us.
Oh, then they didn't send you the most recent version,
This is
which
what
is
they
sort
sent
of.
to us to review.
Okay.
Okay.
That's unfortunate. Well, they did fix that in their latest version. I'm not sure why that didn't propagate out to the commission for review. But I think you're right, that sort of general thing happened. One of the things I noticed was that they fixed the Roberts Farm area for the number of acres, but they show that the Roberts Road is extending quite a bit up into the property as a town road, which is not really the case, and I know that, I'm not sure.
Officially, it's a town road. It's really the driveway to the farmhouse. But
Yeah, but if you look on our tax maps, for instance, you can see the,
it's not very long. But anyway.
yeah, anyway,
Well,
yeah.
we'll deal with that. We'll see what
That's a
they've done to
detail.
revise it. But there's a lot of other details too. So, for example, actually not so much these maps, but if you back up a layer to the WAF layers that this is based on, and you need to go to the state WAF plan website to look at that. And like the tier 1, the highest priority ranked habitat areas, it's fascinating because what you'll see is some really strange artifacts. You'll see perfectly circular areas where somebody has calculated a radius from something. Unless there was a meteorite strike or something, I'm not quite sure what that feature would be. You'll see areas like the Hopkinton Everett Reservoir area is ranked really high. Why? Because it's been studied. You have to have environmental impact statements done for the flooding of the reservoirs. The tracking station in New Boston ranks very high. And it is a good area. But why? Because it's been studied. The Hackett Hill area ranks very high because the Nature Conservancy studied there when they did their preserve. And the areas in between just kind of fall off. So I just took as an example, and this is for the state's wildlife action plan, that, you know, you have the high rankings coming off of that Everett area that are extending over. You've got the area from Kimball Pond and all those preserves that was studied, and that carries over, and they pick up Harry Brook, but then they leave out this big central area in Goffstown, where, among other things, we have the whole complex of drumlins and wetlands, which is a really diverse landscape. I mean, the wildlife is really abundant in that area, and for that reason. I mean, you've got everything there. You've got upland forests, you've got swamps, you've got vernal pools, and then swamps that the adults live in, vernal pools, debris, and it just very abundant area. Also within that area, there's a black gum red maple basin swamp, which according to the Wildlife Action Plan is considered an exemplary habitat, a rare habitat. Also within that area are the 3 Atlantic white cedar swamps in Goffstown, which according to the state is one of the rarest communities in New Hampshire, with fewer than 500 acres of Atlantic white cedar swamp in the entire state. 500 acres in the entire state. We have
We've got
3
like
of
10,
them.
we got like 10 acres roughly in Goffstown.
Yeah, so it's significant. I mean, whippoorwills. Whippoorwills are a study of great interest, whippoorwill surveys that have been done. And again, this region is one of the places in town where they're, come over to my place, so I live in that area, so now you can't even hardly hear yourself think at night because they land on the porch rail, and, yeah, it's pretty cool, but, whippoorwills are very abundant in there, and so on. I can keep going. That area doesn't fall into the plan as quality habitat. It's just simply because nobody has studied it. It's not that the Wildlife Action Plan is bad. It's not that it's, you know, there's anything wrong with the intent. It's just that it's incomplete. And that's fine. I mean, that should be presented as such so that people can understand it and realize that we need to fill in those blanks. But I feel what they're doing in this plan is then they're taking this incomplete data, this and other pieces. They also use an Audubon connectivity wildlife corridor study as part of that input. Care to guess what that's based on? The Wildlife Action Plan, same data set. That's what it extends from. You can't take data that is incomplete and then generate these maps of the town and say, well, these are the areas where you can focus on because we've identified these are the high priority areas. It's not a reasonable comparison because you haven't really compared all these areas to each other. So I think the plan is fundamentally flawed. That part of the plan, putting forth here's the recommendations to each of you towns where you should focus. I think it's just plain completely wrong to do that. But I think the plan itself is a great thing and should go forward, and I hope they take that to heart and work on trying to fill in these data sets before they try to make predictions or recommendations.
Well,
So that's the gist of my review of it.
is that something that a memo should come from the Conservation Commission, or?
Well,
is
David
it-
drafted something.
Oh, okay.
It's in your notes.
All right.
David drafted something to, maybe Jason insisted, so that, and I know Jason is going to attend the meeting tomorrow night. I don't know if David planned on attending,
I'm
but.
gonna try to make it.
Okay, so we formulated a response to them. So, and to their credit, we informed them after the last meeting that we had no time to review this and discuss it. And they did extend the deadline so that all the conservation commissions in the region could comment on it, which was appreciated, so at least there will be some discussion of this. And my concern was always that when we started ranking this, I remember Karen brought up a different way of thinking than I had thought about, like, instead of looking at the region, looking like, well, how do we protect our town? How do we make our regions look high? And my concern is that if every town did that, it's going to be all, like, if they're going to score theirs differently than ours. Because if we felt that way, we would have scored wildlife really low. But we all understood that the plan, it's kind of high and wildlife's valued even though it's flawed. And so it's just, I don't know, it's an interesting, I understand what they're trying to do to gather everyone's input. I'm not sure the numbers and the ranking system actually was all that helpful, but I don't know.
Well,
They didn't
yeah,
ask me,
essentially,
so.
they're going to every town and having people from every town vote on, these are the categories I feel are important. And I guess that does produce something, it's more of a political intention, I think, than say I wouldn't call it scientific, because it isn't based on actual ecological data as much as it is opinions. This is what's, but that's fine if that's the intent and purpose of it. It's just that if you're going to do that, you really have to have complete data sets. You can't have this spotty stuff and expect it to be meaningful, because lo and behold, the end results all kind of look like the Wildlife Action Plan, where the studies have been done. So that's pretty predictable, I think.
I think their main constraint was that they got a grant, and maybe they should have defined it with more input from the town first before heading forward. But they got a grant to do this kind of GIS analysis, and have taken it with the data sets that they have and have gone forward with it. So you mentioned earlier, I think, that there were some general goals that seemed good. I came up with it with sort of 4 pieces of this. There's the general goals, there's their data sets, there's their methodology for turning data sets into final maps. And then there's a 4th thing that's sort of missing, which is how do you incorporate new data into it? And I've asked them that. They don't have any plans at this time to do that. So I guess that would be, if I don't think you mentioned that. If you haven't, that would be the one thing that I would really stress to them, which is tell us how you're going to be able to add, or provide a way of adding updated data to the
Right.
data sets.
Yeah, I didn't ask that specific question, what's your method for getting data in, but did kind of make the point that I feel like, no, you have to get the data in first before you do these final predictions.
That actually was brought up when someone came and presented it. We said, will it be tied in? Will it automatically update? And he said, well, it'll probably be updated every 5 years or so. So, you're gonna get the set of maps, and they're gonna exist in space until the new, set is produced. And that was one of Collis's concerns, is once this thing is out there,
Right.
people are gonna look at these values, and without understanding the process behind it or the flaws, they're gonna say, gee, Goffstown doesn't have a lot of valuable land, we should put our stuff in New Boston or where, or whatever. So it was,
Or-
was the, concern.
Or it could misdirect it within a town too. You could actually miss the more important areas and be focusing on a less important area.
Right.
It's
Right.
not the true priority if the data isn't quite
I-
correct.
I think we expressed at that time a really strong concern about this being set in stone, when we really weren't
Mhm.
pleased with how it was going right off the bat, so.
And I like the way you wrote this up, David, and I like the
Yes.
tone, and I definitely appreciate you guys going to the meeting and representing our concerns and getting it out on record, so that's really
Do
good.
we need a vote to say that the whole commission, or is this, are we gonna,
We can
David
if we want
presented
to.
this, but I think you should, for the record, that
Why
this
don't you
is
make
what
a motion?
I move that, David Neiman's response to this, study, which I think we've all read, comments on the Pecatoquag River Watershed Land Conservation Plan be sent to be voted on and then sent to the
Southern New Hampshire Planning
Right,
Commission.
right, thank you.
Okay,
As our response to this.
okay. Jean seconds.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? No? Okay, motion carried. And thank you, David, and thank you, Jason, for representing our interests in this. It's been really good. You want to add it?
Just an FYI, my guess is they probably won't change things much, which, that's it. But I know part of their intended process is then, after they come up with a final draft, to promote towns to accept it as part of their master plan. So I'll just give you a heads up, that's kind of what they're looking for. And I guess what I'm hearing is that based on what they have, that wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for Goffstown at this time.
That's a good
Yeah,
suggestion.
That's certainly something I can mention.
I read that part as well, understood that that's one of the goals, and that's how I would come down on it, is no, not until it's accurate.
Okay. Great.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for all your hard work on this, Jason and David. Okay, sorry. So we'll return to the agenda. So first up, we have a public discussion with Fournier Revocable Trust regarding map 7, lot 82, landscaping business site plan on Patty Hill Road.
Yes, if I could, my name is Kevin Ballmer with Divine Element. Mr. Fournier's attorney. I just want to speak very briefly. Peter Schauer, the wetland scientist, is here as well, just to go over some of the issues and the results that we've gotten since the last meeting. The
Did everyone
primary-
see the results from,
I hope everyone got the DES letter.
where are we? So you guys have plans in front of you? Yep, okay.
The primary issue that arose the last meeting was that a complaint had been filed with DES that there had been wetland and alteration of terrain violations on the property. DES has since done an inspection of the property that occurred on June 11th, and the letter that you should all have on June 14th. Their determination was that there were no wetlands or alteration of terrain violations.
Do we all have that letter?
Yes, it got mailed to everybody.
I did? Yep. Okay.
Kim, you wanna look it
I
over?
got my pile here, sorry, I'm going through the wrong pile. I read the letter, just wanted to make sure everybody else got a chance to see it and take a look at it. So, yes, okay, thank you.
Peter Schauer was there as well, and so he's here tonight if anyone has any questions.
And I spoke to Chris Bryson too, so, yes.
Okay, great. Also briefly, another issue that came up was non-permitted septic, moved septic field, I think. I apologize, I only have one copy. It was just issued today, but Mr. Fournier has received approval for the septic system. We're going to can give you one copy. I just received it. We'll be submitting this to the planning board tomorrow night as well, so I'm happy to bring extra copies of that time to give to either Brian or Patty if you guys would like, if you'd like
No,
copies.
Patty's got the official copy, that's fine.
Okay, and then the last issue that, that the, Dean Gibson, one of the abutters brought up was the, potential impact from salt. First, I know you had not, at that point, had a chance to look over the results. I just want to make one statement of concern, on our part, and that is that Mr. Gibson himself, who's clearly adverse to Mr. Fournier and to this proposal, took those samples. So I have some concerns of the validity. That said, I don't want to downplay the potential impact of salt. We understand that. I think regardless of the specific results, I think we'll have addressed the salt issue by meeting the variance condition, putting we'll have a cover on the salt shed, which is already existing, and a concrete pad. As part of the revisions to the site plan, those are still ongoing, but we're going to propose that that concrete pad actually be extended beyond the front of the salt pile, essentially so that any trucks backing in would be on top of the pad, and any spills between the pile and the truck would be contained. So I think that addresses all of the concerns that were voiced last meeting. I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, Mr. Schauer is here as well to address any questions.
The salt values that we were presented with were really high. And I'm not really sure what the situation is for rectifying that.
Well,
Do you know what you're
I
required to
know
do?
Those are salt values for, that's their impacts to freshwater organisms. So drinking water, these are not results that were taken in a freshwater body, a stream or a pond. They were taken on the ground. There are no groundwater standards for chloride. There are some drinking water standards that deal with aesthetics, but again, we're not talking about impacts to drinking water. But I believe, again, I do question these specific results, not the concern over salt. I think we'll have fully contained the salt and the salt runoff by having a roof and a floor on that salt shed.
Well, I guess probably the concern is moving forward, that is, I mean, you're complying with, those are what obviously must be the required laws for salt sheds or those sort of things.
No,
Go
When I
ahead.
had originally called DES, and I think I had stated the call is, all they had stated for me, at that time, they said, I didn't need a forest, it needed to be covered, it was the best management practice, and that's what I went and did. The other thing is, I would've got a water sample myself, but that water stopped running, shortly, a couple weeks after April, I think, after
Right.
you guys left.
Right.
It stopped, so there's no place for me to
Right.
get any samples to be able to approve it otherwise.
Okay. Okay. So, Commission, what we have in front of us is a plan that we need to comment on. You guys are up at planning tomorrow night, is that correct? You've heard from the abutters, we've heard from the wetland scientists, we've heard from the state. Does anyone have any questions for either the applicant or his wetland scientist?
You're gonna be continued, right? You're requesting to be continued,
We've
but you need to go
requested to be
before the board.
continued, although the planning board has, at their last meeting, I understand, because we weren't present, that they have some concerns about continuing and have talked about not continuing. I'm hopeful that we'll convince them, because we've been trying to address your concerns among other concerns. But yes, the plan is to continue tomorrow night.
And Brian is recommending they continue it. He has a
Brian
recommendation to
Rose.
continue.
Yes. Okay. Why are we still continuing it? You still have outstanding design issues?
We have
or-
designed it, we had waited to complete the design issue, the final plans, because we wanted to make sure that the wetlands issues were fully addressed.
Right.
So they're in progress, and the drainage, there's additional drainage engineering that's in progress, which should be completed shortly, but not by tomorrow night.
Okay. And just to remind everyone, because this isn't a subdivision, they don't technically have to stay out of the wetland buffer at all, although they are. I believe you're maybe 50 feet, at least, maybe even 100 or 75 feet off of, if everybody looks at the map, there's this wetland here. And nothing is happening to the western portion of the property. It's all happening on the gravel that's already on site. I believe the majority of the squabble has been about the gravel on site as it is currently, So when we look at this site in terms of Conservation Commission concerns, we've been told by DES they didn't fill historic wetland. Frankly, I'm shocked, but sometimes water running across the site doesn't make a wetland. Their letter in the discussion I had with Chris is that it was historic sheet flow, which the abutters may have thought was a wetland, but there wasn't the soils to hold it. And we don't see any impact to the potential wetlands to the existing wetlands to the west. There are off-site wetlands that this may drain to, but I believe that you are addressing those. For example, this gravel area, I mean, those of us who went out there, it's like this. And so the water that comes off of that dumps just off your property.